Daughter died 14 months ago. Last Thursday, I saw her standing in line at the post office 3 blocks from my house. I know how that sounds. I am 63 years old and I have not lost my mind. Though there were days after the accident when I wished I had. Grief does things to a person that no one warns you about before it arrives. It lives in the walls. It changes the way light looks in the morning. It makes you stop trusting your own eyes. But I trust my eyes now. I trusted them the moment I walked through that glass door and felt my whole body go cold. Her name was Laurel, my daughter, 29 years old when the river took her, or so I was told. Brown hair that curled at the ends when the weather was humid, the same way mine did when I was young. A small birthmark just beneath her left ear, shaped like nothing in particular, but something I had kissed 1,000 times since the day she was born. The woman in line at the post office had that curl, that birthmark, that way of tilting her head to the right when she was reading something, the way Laurel always did, as if the words made more sense at an angle. I stood frozen just inside the door, my hand still on the handle, cold air from outside mixing with the dry heat of the building. There were 4 people between us. She was holding a padded envelope and looking down at her phone. I said her name before I could stop myself. Not loud, just a reflex. Laurel. She did not look up. I said it again, louder this time. Laurel. The woman in front of her turned around. 2 people looked over their shoulders. The woman with the curly hair and the padded envelope slowly raised her head. For 1 full second, we looked at each other. Then she looked away, back to her phone, as if I were a stranger, as if I were nobody. I drove home on autopilot. I do not remember the turns or the lights or whether I stopped where I was supposed to. I only remember sitting in my driveway afterward with the engine still running, staring at the steering wheel, thinking about the 14 months I had spent learning to live without her. I thought about the memorial service at the church where she was baptized. I thought about the urn on my mantle that I could not bring myself to move. I thought about her husband, my son-in-law, who had held me while I sobbed and told me she would have wanted us to keep going. I thought about how grief had finally started to loosen its grip, how I had just begun sleeping past 5 in the morning, how 2 weeks ago I had laughed at something on television and then immediately felt guilty about it. I thought about all of that, and then I thought, if my daughter was alive, what exactly had I been mourning? Laurel was a kayaker, not a casual one, not the kind who rents equipment at the state park and floats around for an hour. She had been doing it seriously since college. She knew water the way some people know roads, by instinct, by memory, by the sound it made before it changed. Her husband, a man I had liked and trusted for 6 years of marriage, told me she had gone out alone on a Saturday morning, which was not unusual, and that her kayak had been found overturned near the downstream bend of the Shenandoah, which was a stretch she knew well. They searched for 4 days. They found her life jacket caught in brush a 1/4 mile down. They never found her body. I had accepted that. People told me it happens sometimes, especially with moving water and cold temperatures. The river takes what it takes. I had a memorial service without a body, and I had carried that open wound for 14 months, and I had told myself that was the shape grief came in sometimes. She was not dead. She was standing in a post office 3 blocks from my house, reading her phone, with that envelope under her arm and that tilt to her head. I went inside and sat at the kitchen table for a long time. The house was the same as it always was. Her picture on the refrigerator. The mug she gave me one Mother's Day, the one I still used every morning because stopping felt like giving something up. The silence that had moved in after she was gone and never fully left. I am a retired school teacher. 31 years of 2nd grade. I know how to stay calm when everything around me is not. I know how to slow my breathing and think in straight lines when my instincts are pulling in every direction. So I sat at the table, and I thought. I was not imagining things. The birthmark was not something grief invented. You cannot conjure a birthmark from 20 feet away in a post office. You cannot conjure the way a person holds their head. I got up and went to my bedroom and pulled out the photo album from the shelf in the closet. I sat on the edge of the bed and turned the pages slowly. Birthday parties. Christmas mornings. A photo from her wedding day, the two of us standing outside the church, her veil blowing sideways in the wind, both of us laughing. I looked at her face in every picture, and then I thought about the face I had seen today, and I understood with a terrible clarity that I had not been wrong. That night I called my son-in-law. He answered on the second ring, his voice relaxed, the kind of relax that takes effort to maintain. I asked him how he was doing. He said fine. I asked if anything had been going on. He said not much, same as always. I told him I had been thinking about Laurel, and he made the right sounds, the careful ones, the ones people make when they think they know where a conversation is going. I did not tell him what I had seen. I thanked him for picking up and said goodnight. I hung up and sat in the dark for a while. Something was wrong. Something had been wrong for a long time. I just had not known what to call it until now. My son-in-law had been attentive in the months after Laurel disappeared. He had checked on me regularly, brought food, sat with me while I cried. He had also handled all of the paperwork, the estate, the insurance. He had told me it was easier if he dealt with it, that I did not need to carry that burden on top of everything else. I had led him. I had been grateful. Grief makes you generous with trust. It burns away the part of you that asks too many questions. I did not sleep that night. I lay in bed listening to the house settle around me, and I thought about every conversation I had ever had with my son-in-law about Laurel's finances. She had worked in insurance, which was one of those quiet ironies I could not ignore now. She had a life insurance policy, a substantial one. She had mentioned it once, said it was part of her benefits package, that she wanted to make sure her family was covered if something happened. Her family met me, and her husband. I got up at 4 a.m. and went to my desk and pulled out every piece of paper related to Laurel's estate that I had kept copies of. There was not much. He had told me he would send me a summary. I had a copy of her will, which was simple, and the letter from his attorney explaining that the estate had been settled and that my share of certain personal items would be arranged. There was a number on a document I had never really looked at closely until now. The life insurance payout, just over $900,000. I sat there with that number in front of me and thought about the river, about 4 days of searching, about a kayak and a life jacket and no body, about how my son-in-law had cried at the service the right amount, in the right moments. The next morning, I drove to the post office. I arrived when it opened, and I sat in my car across the street and I waited. I did not know if she would come back. I only knew I had nowhere else to start. She arrived at 11:15. Same brown hair, same walk, that slight lean forward, like she was always moving towards something. She was wearing a jacket I did not recognize and carrying a tote bag from a bookstore I had never seen. She did not come inside. She checked the cluster mailboxes along the outer wall, the private box rentals. She pulled out a handful of envelopes, leafed through them, put them in the bag. Then she got into a silver hatchback, parked at the curb, and drove away. I followed her. I kept 3 cars between us. I felt foolish and terrified and more awake than I had felt in over a year. We drove for about 20 minutes, out of the neighborhood I knew and into a part of town I rarely visited. Older houses, tall oaks, streets without sidewalks. She turned onto a quiet road and pulled into the driveway of a small white house with green shutters and a porch with 2 rocking chairs. A man came out before she even had the car door open. Late 30s, dark beard, work boots. He met her at the car, took the bag from her, kissed her cheek. Familiar, easy, the kind of easy that takes months to build. She smiled, Laurel's smile, My daughter's smile, the one that came from the left side first, always the left. I sat with my hands on the steering wheel and let myself understand what I was looking at. She was not dead. She was living in a small white house with a man I had never seen. She had a mailbox rental at the post office 3 blocks from the home she grew up in. She had let me sit with her ashes on my mantle, which were not her ashes at all, for 14 months. I took photos. My hands were steady. I was surprised by that. I drove home and I sat in my kitchen and I did not cry. I thought I would. I had cried so much in the past 14 months that I assumed I had a reflex for it. But what came instead was something quieter. A cold, exact feeling. Like a window coming into focus. My daughter had chosen this. That was the part I kept returning to. Not the money, not the husband, not the logistics of faking a death in a river. My daughter had looked at her life, and at me, and at the home we shared after her father passed, at the holidays and the phone calls and the 31 years of being loved by someone who showed up every single time, and she had chosen to let me believe she was dead. I called a private investigator the following morning. I found her through a recommendation from a woman at my church, whose family had dealt with a fraud situation years ago. The investigator was direct and asked the right questions without asking too many. I told her what I knew. She told me what she needed. I want to know who the man is, I said. I want to know about the insurance claim. I want to know what name she is using. She named her fee. I had savings. I had made do on a teacher's pension for 3 years, and I was careful with money in the way that people who grew up without much tend to be. I wrote a check. "Give me 10 days, she said. I went home and I lived those 10 days as if nothing had changed. I watered my plants. I went to the grocery store. I attended my Thursday morning Bible study and sat in the same chair I always sat in and listened to women I had known for decades talk about grace, and I did not say a word about what I was carrying. I visited Laurel's urn on the mantle every morning out of habit. I stopped pretending to myself that it meant anything. On the 9th day, the investigator called. "Come in," she said. "Bring something to write with." The folder she handed me across the desk was thin, but heavy in the way that true things are. The man in the photograph was named Preston. He and my daughter had been together for at least 2 years before the accident, based on phone records and financial transactions the investigator had traced. They had opened a joint account in another state under her new name 4 months before she disappeared. A life insurance claim had been filed by my son-in-law 8 weeks after the accident and paid out 3 months later. Full payout. $912,000. My son-in-law had known. Of course he had known. A man does not file a life insurance claim without a body and walk away with $900,000 without knowing. The investigator had also found the name Laurel was using now. It was ordinary. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would raise an eyebrow. She had built herself a quiet life with a quiet name in the town close enough to where she grew up that she could rent a mailbox near her old home, which I thought about for a long time. She was watching. Or she had been once. She was close on purpose. I did not know what that meant, and I was not sure I wanted to. I took the folder home. I made dinner. I ate it at the table where I had eaten 10,000 dinners with my daughter over the years, where she had done her homework and argued about curfews, and told me once, when she was 17 and furious with me about something I can no longer remember, that she wished she had a different mother. She had not meant it. Children say those things. I had known that then, and I had forgiven her before she was done saying it. I sat at that table now, and I thought about forgiveness in a different way, not as something I owed her, as something I had the right to withhold. The next morning, I called my son-in-law and told him I needed to meet. Something about Laurel's estate, a question about a document. He agreed without hesitation, the same easy voice, the same careful warmth. We met at a coffee shop near his office. He ordered his usual. I ordered nothing. He started with the small talk, and I let him go for about 2 minutes, and then I set the folder on the table and slid it across to him and watched his face. He stopped talking. He looked at the top page. His jaw moved, but nothing came out. He swallowed. I did not speak. I waited. "How did you?" he started. I did not let him finish. I told him I had hired someone. I told him I knew about the account opened 4 months before she vanished. I told him I knew about Preston. I told him I knew that he had filed the insurance claim and collected the money, and that the body in the river that was never found because it was never there. He put his hands flat on the table. It was something people do when they need to feel a surface beneath them. "She wanted out," he said finally. I did not know how to stop it. I leaned forward. "You collected $900,000 on your wife's death. You let her mother put ashes on a mantle and mourn for 14 months. His face changed then, not to shame exactly, to something more complicated, something that told me he had made peace with his choices a long time ago and was only now being asked to look at them directly. He said her name, not mine. He said Laurel as if she were still the topic, as if she were the center of the thing. "She wanted a new life," he said. "I wanted to give her that." "What did she give you?" I asked. His silence answered. I had already spoken to an attorney the night before from my kitchen, with the folder open on the table in front of me. She had been clear with me. Insurance fraud was a federal matter. The false death claim involved forged documentation, which carried its own charges. My son-in-law's cooperation, or lack of it, would determine a great deal about how things proceeded. I told him that now. I told him what the attorney had told me, and I watched him absorb it. "I need time," he said. "You had 14 months, I said. "I am giving you until Friday." I left the coffee shop and I drove to the White House with the green shutters. I parked at the curb and I sat there for a moment. The porch was empty. The rocking chairs were still. A pot of geraniums by the door was doing well watered, tended. My daughter had always been good with plants. She had kept a windowsill full of herbs in every apartment she had ever lived in. I got out of the car. I walked up the path. I knocked. She opened the door herself. She was wearing a cardigan I did not recognize, and her hair was pulled back, and she looked older than she had looked in the post office, or maybe I was just seeing her more clearly now. Her eyes went wide. Then something moved across her face that I could not quite name. Not guilt exactly, not relief, something in between. "Mom," she said. That word, after 14 months, from the mouth of the woman who had let me believe she was gone. I told her I was not there to forgive her. I told her that was not what this visit was about. I told her I wanted her to know that I knew, that I had found her, that she had not escaped into invisibility the way she had planned. She started to say something about being trapped, about needing something she could not explain, about Preston, about her marriage, about feeling like she had no way out. I had no doubt that some of what she said was true. People do not make choices like hers from a position of comfort. But I had also sat next to her urn for 14 months, and I had also written a check to a private investigator with money I had saved carefully for 31 years, and I was also 63 years old, and not willing to spend whatever time I had left pretending that love means accepting anything. I told her about the attorney. I told her what came next. I told her the choice she would need to make. She asked if there was any way to stop it. "No," I said, "not the way you mean." I turned to leave. She said my name. I stopped. I turned halfway. "I loved you," she said. "I want you to know that was real." I looked at her for a moment, at the face I had known since before she could speak, at the eyes that were exactly like her father's, which had been one of the first things I ever loved about her. What you did was real too, I said. All of it. I walked back to my car. I sat for a moment with my hands in my lap. The geraniums on her porch were bright red in the afternoon light, well-tended, alive. I drove home. The legal process moved in the way legal processes do, steadily and without drama, one document at a time. My son-in-law cooperated fully once he understood what cooperation looked like compared to the alternative. The insurance company pursued its own recovery through civil litigation. My daughter retained an attorney and worked out terms that involved repayment, significant penalties, and a period of supervised probation. Preston, who had known but claimed limited involvement in the planning, faced his own separate proceedings. There was no trial, there was no public spectacle, just the slow grinding work of the law doing what it is designed to do. I visited the attorney's office twice more and signed what I needed to sign. I answered questions when I was asked them. I was not interested in revenge. I told people who used that word. I was interested in the record being accurate. There is a difference. My son-in-law came to see me once after it was all settled. He sat in my living room, where he had sat many times before, and he said he was sorry. I believed him. I also understood that being sorry is not the same as having chosen differently, and those two things can be true at the same time. We did not stay in touch. My daughter and I spoke on the phone once, about 6 months later. It was short, and it was awkward, and it was honest in a way that I did not expect. She asked how I was. I told her. I asked her the same. She answered. At the end of the call, she said she hoped someday I might be willing to see her again. I said I would think about it. That was not a yes. It was also not a no. It was something more true than either of those, which is that I am 63 years old, and I have learned, slowly and at great cost, that the most honest thing a person can say is sometimes simply, I do not know yet. I moved Laurel's urn from the mantel. I drove it to the river on a Tuesday morning in October, the kind of morning when the air is just starting to turn. I stood on the bank where she had launched her kayak 100 times before the day she chose to stop. I opened the urn. The ashes inside belonged to no one I knew, some small comfort at a funeral home that had asked no questions about an unclaimed cremation. I scattered them on the water anyway. Not for her, for me. For the woman I had been in those 14 months who had grieved completely and without reservation and had not deserved any of it. I gave that grief a place to land. Then I drove home. The house is mine now in a different way than it was before. Not quieter, just honest. I restarted things I had let go in the year of mourning, my garden, my Thursday walks, a watercolor class at the community center that I had always told myself I would try. I am not good at it. That turns out not to matter. I do not know if I will hear from my daughter again. I do not know if I will be ready when I do. What I know is that I spent 63 years believing that love required me to be available to everyone who needed me, regardless of what they had taken. That was not love. That was a habit I mistook for a virtue. The woman I am now knows the difference, and that, in the end, is the only thing I did not let them take from me. I still think about the geraniums on her porch. Bright red, well-watered. Someone tended them every day. That detail stays with me more than almost anything else, because it told me that my daughter had not fallen apart. She had simply walked away and built herself a tidy life while I sat 14 months with an urn on my mantel that held a stranger's ashes. There is a kind of clarity that only comes after you have stopped being afraid of the truth. I spent the first days after seeing her at the post office, telling myself I might be wrong. I spent the nights going through photo albums, looking for reasons to doubt my own eyes. But I think what I was really doing was giving myself time to become the person who could handle what came next. Grief had already broken me open. What I did not know until then was that being broken open leaves room for something steadier to grow in. What my daughter and her husband did, had a logic to it. Every piece fit. The timing of the account opened in another state. The insurance claim filed 8 weeks after she vanished. My son-in-law's careful warmth in the months after, the way he managed every document and steered me away from questions I might have asked. None of it was careless. It was planned. And that is the part that required me to think clearly rather than feel my way through, because when someone has planned against you, falling apart is the one thing you cannot afford to do. I am not a particularly brave person. I taught second grade for 31 years. I know how to manage a classroom, and I know how to stay calm when a child is frightened, but I have never thought of myself as someone who acts under pressure. What I learned is that doing the right thing does not always feel like bravery. Sometimes it just feels like the next logical step. You hire the investigator. You read the folder. You call the attorney. You show up at the coffee shop and you slide the papers across the table and you do not look away. What my daughter could not have accounted for was that losing her had already cost me everything I was afraid to lose. There was nothing left to protect me from. That is the strange gift that the hardest year of my life gave me. It burned away the part of me that hesitated. I think about the choices the three of them made, Laurel, her husband, my son-in-law, and I understand that every one of those choices had a cost they did not fully calculate. You can plan a disappearance with precision and still not be able to plan what happens to the people you leave behind or what those people decide to do once they understand what was done to them. The truth has a way of finding the surface, not through fate, not through anything mystical, just through the ordinary persistence of someone who refuses to stay confused. I want to say to anyone listening, the sharpest thing you can do when someone tries to make you feel small, or crazy, or too fragile to know your own mind, is to stay curious. Ask the next question. Look at the next document. Trust what you know. That is not a dramatic act. It is just steadiness. It is the quiet decision to keep thinking when everything in you wants to stop. I am 63 years old, and I did not come through this because I was extraordinary. I came through it because I decided, one morning before dawn, with a folder on my kitchen table, that I was not going to let the story end the way someone else had written it. That choice made alone, in the quiet, with no one watching, was mine. And it changed everything that came after.